Hello, Automated Success Show listeners. I am here today with Isaac Roberts with, I keep doing this, Scythe Robotics. He's COO there right now. Super excited to have him on the show. We just had a technical difficulty, so we just kind of hit the restart button. But, you got to love technology. You got to just deal with it. So, Isaac, tell me about your amazing company. I'll tell you, I'm super excited to be talking to you today. I love what you guys have done with the all-electric automatic mower, but tell me a little about yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. So when I grew up, I was spending my summers pushing a lawnmower around and digging ditches, working for my father's business, which was a golf course irrigation and construction company. And every single time I lamented the heat. I mean, the Florida sun is no joke. Summertime, it's not super fun. So I have a pretty strong respect for landscaping. And one thing that's always kind of stuck with me just about the industry and the people that I've met over the last couple of years in particular is the work ethic that goes into the industry. It's one of these things where it's pretty rare. I've built a lot of different businesses over the last 17 or so years and in different industries every time. What I find really refreshing about the landscaping industry is it's just really good people, hardworking, honest, ethical, and very much just trying to like build a business and take care of people. And ultimately, any business, it kind of just comes down to adding value, right? And so people going out and saying, "Hey, can I add value for you?" Just like I was doing as a teenager, walking around the neighborhood saying, "Hey, can I mow your lawn for you? Or can I take care of your bushes for you?" Or whatever it is. It goes back to that like core principle of basic economics, which is add value, generate value, collect value, right? So my short background story is just that grew up with that scenario in mind. Started working for the family company when I was about 18. Started to do GPS as-builts for golf courses as we started putting them together. So I'd walk around with a GPS backpack and just hit each head and walk around, and very nascent technology at the time. It's come a long way since then. But it was one of those big value adds, right? It's like the golf course is like, I need to know where the sprinkler heads are. I need to know how the pipes are laid, where things are going so I can service it all, and trying to give them better value. Just say, well, I can get it more precise than just the back of the napkin drawings that we'd all do, like before GPS. So I went into the Navy after kind of realizing that I didn't want to take over my family's business. Spent about 4 years doing that. And then after the Navy, just got out, started focusing on what kind of businesses would be possible to start, and started working on an undergrad in chemistry. So I finished my associates during the Navy, finished the undergrad in chemistry afterwards, started my master's, and then I had an opportunity to take a company that I was building at the time, which was a like messaging service. So the idea there was just that I saw a ton of food service businesses and movie theaters, anybody that had a perishable item, trying to go and bridge the gap in supply and demand. Just say, well, if there's an empty table at a restaurant or there's an empty seat at a movie theater, if somebody was able to, get a discount there, they might be able to fill one of or both of those, right? And so building a text message system to do that. Ended up taking the company public through a reverse merger acquisition back in 2010. I've kind of just been building companies ever since. So never finished my master's. My advisor said, I think you're going to be just fine. You don't need the master's. Get out of my lab. And I think that at the time I was a little upset by it. I wanted to finish and say, yeah, I've got my master's in chemistry, and that never quite happened, but lessons learned along the way. And I've been looking at technology businesses ever since. I've been building brick and mortar companies, tech companies, bouncing back and forth. One might be a little more aspirational than another, and then you kind of realize, well, I need this one to pay. I need this one to make money definitively. It needs to make a profit so that I can survive. And then you go back and forth. And next thing you know, half a dozen companies later, an old co-founder calls you up and says, hey, you interested in building robots? And I'm like, hell yeah. And here we are.
That's awesome. So first of all, you are the definition of a serial entrepreneur from what it sounds like. And I think that that's great. That's excellent. One of the reasons I started this podcast was for my daughter who's going to college right now for business management. So she can listen and learn from people like you on the show every day. I'm always inspired to hear that there's other people like myself that obviously you must immerse yourself in what you do every day and with all those different businesses. But I think a lot of people that are not like yourself don't understand that your brain is probably never idle, and every time you see something you're trying to figure out a solution to it. So first of all, I applaud you for that. Keep going, because you're bringing awesome stuff to the table for people every day. So I think your professor was smart telling you get out of his lab. So I don't think you should be upset about it at all. So so tell me about your latest and greatest thing then with Scythe now. Obviously, uh, everybody that tunes into the show knows how I feel about automation. Okay, but one of the reasons I have other people on the show is there's many different angles of automation, right? And the automation is not a one tool solves all scenario. So I want to learn more about the tool you made to solve an industry issue.
Yeah, completely. So the way that we started the conversation, so Jack and I previously built another company called Replica, and then we sold that to a company called Occipital. And Jack's background, he's a software engineer with a focus on computer vision. And the way that we actually met was I had previously sold a different business and was looking to get into something interesting, not just something that would pay. And I was really interested in self-driving cars, and I thought this would be a fantastic thing to get into. And this was 2013, and one of my best friends was in the lab over at GW, and they had some self-driving car work going on, and it was an automation lab led by Gabe Sidley. And so I reached out to him, and he said, well, self-driving cars are really hard. Let's make a mobile app. And so I was like, okay, we'll do that. And we got a little bit into it and realized we needed some additional manpower, right? So we needed another founder or so. And I asked my friend Vince, was like, who's the best engineer in the lab? And they said this guy named Jack. Brandon and Vince were other co-founders of the company. And I was like, well, great, let's get Jack on the team. And that's kind of how we met. And after we sold to Occipital, it was about a year and a half after starting the company. Jack's been over at Occipital for a couple of years. I've been building another company, and we've been talking just back and forth a little bit about what might be next, and both interested in robotics and automation. And ultimately, I think that I've had a big focus on like two areas of technology, like for the last maybe 2 decades, right? The thing that's always been interesting to me is leverage, right? So if you say the ultimate scenario of leverage is that you could engineer something like an organism that would literally exist and perpetuate itself to do whatever you want it to do, right? That is what we've done with crops. That's what we've done with livestock. That's what we've done, and not necessarily in a very advanced manner. We've done it in a form of like, I'm going to breed these two bean stalks to get the kind of beanstalk that I want. And then over thousands of years, now you have something like corn, right? Which is just completely different from what it originally was in the natural state, right? They're wild type species, right? And so that's what is like maybe the maximum leverage, is something that you generate once to then go and replicate and perpetuate itself to do what you want it to do, right? Like cattle now. The tier below that would be generate something that goes and does what you want it to do, but it can't replicate itself. And that's really what we're looking at in robotics, right? So we have to make the robot, we have to go and get the thing set up to be able to run around, and we have to teach it to be able to do the task we want it to do. We have to make it one time, but the objective is that it'll go out and do a bunch of work for us. And if we make something incredibly durable, then it can do a lot of work for us, as opposed to just, it'll do it for 2 weeks before it dies kind of deal, right? And so when Jack and I were having these conversations in the early days, before starting Scythe, there was something that he brought up, which was nobody's really doing outdoor autonomy, right? Like the idea of autonomy for outdoor scenarios is very, very nascent. Not a lot of work's been done and put into it, but there's definitely some interesting science and technology to build out there. And we were talking about various use cases, and one day Jack's riding his mower. He's got 2 acres in Boulder, and it just hits him. He's like, wait a minute, like I'm doing something outdoors right now. I'm mowing the grass. I hate mowing the grass. Why am I mowing the grass? We should make robots to mow this grass. He calls me up and tells me this, and I was like, I also hate mowing grass. Let's go ahead and do this. And between the two of us, we had software and sales covered, but we needed somebody for hardware, because you kind of you need to be able to do software, you need to be able to do business development, and you also need to do hardware, because you have to actually build the robot, right? And he said, there's this brilliant guy over at Occipital. We call him the Wonderkin. His name's Davis, barely able to drink legally, but he's a wizard in hardware. I was like, great, let's talk to him. And then Jack introduced me to him, fell in love with the guy. He's super sharp, incredibly kind, thoughtful, all around just great person. And so that's kind of how Scythe began. And that was, I want to say, late 2017. Then we raised our first round of capital in the first, towards the end of the first quarter of 2018. And all along, we've kind of been analyzing this, and true to the quality of my co-founders, there's been a strong analysis based on like first principles of what are we actually trying to solve, and what's the best way to go into it from an engineering dynamic, right? And the initial thought was, well, if we make a robot, the goal is we make one design and then we can make millions of them and then they run around. So it might make more sense to make something smaller. And so we started with a 21-inch. We literally, to make the first prototype, we ordered an electric mower off of Amazon Prime. It showed up at the office in San Francisco. We took the whole thing apart and took the electric motor and the deck out of this 21-inch Greenworks machine, built an 80/20 frame around it, and had it driving around a parking lot, right? And it was kind of like, oh, this is proof of concept. And when we showed the designs to landscapers, they were like, it's too small. The wheels are on backwards. This is, we love your idea. We don't like this execution. And we kind of learned that there's this, this balance that has to be struck, right? You have the goal of the robot engineer is to say, I want to make something that is the perfect engineering solution and can do all of the things. The landscaper is like, this doesn't fit my archetype for the equipment that I'm used to. It looks small, it's not powerful, I'm afraid it's going to break. All these things kind of like run in the cycles. And so we went, and over the course of 4 prototypes, we've gone from that small unit to then a 36-inch deck, and then another larger, thicker 36-inch deck, to now the Caribou unit, which is what you see on our website now. It's a 52-inch machine, about 1,000 pounds. Definitely looks like a commercial mower, standard form factor. And all of a sudden it's like landscapers, as every time we step up, it's like landscapers say, okay, this is starting to look a little more real. And then Bighorn, which was our 3rd gen, it was like, oh, this is a real thing. And you see the guys like standing on it with their feet. They like kick the tires. They do the normal landscaper thing of like, let me like get tactile with this to make sure it's not going to fall apart on me. And now we're at Caribou, and it's like, oh, this is a real thing. And so going back to the full circle here, the whole philosophy has been all along, like, build something that will last, build something that's going to be incredibly durable. And when you analyze things from first principles and say, well, there's gas-powered systems today, what would be the ideal scenario? Is electric possible? And then once you realize Teslas are running around, EVs are building up the whole, like the framework for the vendor network and the components and everything, it starts to make a lot of sense. And then you say, well, we can reduce the complexity by several orders of magnitude. We can reduce the component number by orders of magnitude. And these things are going to be far more durable as a result. And ultimately, that's what landscapers want.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up a good point of, it's one of my biggest issues when I've been talking to landscapers, especially, I'm using all the smaller units that don't mow straight lines and whatever. But like I've always said, you know, 5 years ago when I got into it, my main goal was to convert with what I had and take what manufacturers like yourselves give me in the future, right? Because we just wanted to emerge as that, like a leader in outdoor automation. But that's what happens to me a lot of times. Even consumers see something like sounds like your first prototype, and they're like, no, that's too small. But nobody understands that the reason mowers got larger and larger and larger is just so that it would offset the labor costs increasing, because there's always been a mow per acre ceiling that the consumer basically just says, I'm not paying any more money than this to cut my grass. So the manufacturer just made it big. I mean, look at even batwing mowers. It's like, how much cutting square footage can we do in one pass? So, but I do think, that platform, so you're at 52 inches right now, that, I think that's good for many, just so as a landscaper giving you feedback. It fits in your typical enclosed trailer without issue.
Yeah.
Um, it does fall into that, like your typical stand-on units, a 48 to 54. So it fits that visual mold. Weight is not bad because you can put a couple of them in a trailer, probably a few of them, and still be at a standard weight of any trailer. I'm sure these are all things you guys looked at, right, when you were making it. So I commend you for that. What I'm pretty impressed about is your 1,000 pounds with the batteries, because batteries are not light. So I'm assuming you're running lithium. What's your battery system like, and how long is its runtime?
Yeah, we've tried a couple different packs at this point, and we're running a lithium ion pack right now. We'll probably stick with that. One of the, there are a lot of technical details that you could break down, but ultimately it comes down to more of a like design philosophy, right? There's the battery packs, ultimately they're limited by the battery chemistry science where we are today. And that's something that's in, heavy development now. I think in no small part, if not in just dramatically large part, due to Tesla and them pushing the frontier there, and actually like having people recognize this is not only possible, but this is in extremely high demand. Um, the So getting into the battery pack and where we are with it, it's like the ultimate thing to dig in on is, what does that really mean, and what are we trying to go after? And so if you have a human on the machine, you've got another 200 pounds or so that you're carrying around. But if you take that off, the battery pack is a little heavier than a normal gas engine, right? But you're also removing a bunch of parts. You're removing the pulleys, you're removing the belts. You start to enclose your motors, even for the cutting blades. So it gets to be this idea of like, what is durable, what is viable long term, and what are the best engineering decisions to make there. And I think what's really interesting is you've seen companies like Mean Green, and we've seen Gravely making an electric mower. There's not a ton of, like, there just aren't really a lot of options on the electrical side for commercial landscaper equipment, right? And it's kind of like two problems. One, you're limited by the battery chemistry science, right? So you've got the Husqvarna blowers, and they're really big battery packs that you're carrying around. But those don't even hold a candle to gas-powered blowers, because turns out blowing air is really energy intensive, right? But mowing is one of these things where you see the Husqvarna units and they're like little razor blades cutting grass. It's one of those things that's a very much in progress scenario. And what you see in progress scenarios looking like is something that's really good is going to be really expensive for a period of time, right? And so what that ends up doing is, for us, building a robots as a service business model, it allows for us to say the lifetime value on every robot that we make is dramatically higher than the lifetime value that somebody like John Deere makes, where they say, well, we're going to build a machine and it's going to cost somebody $10,000. So they need to make sure that it's going to be around $1,000 and around $1,000 and just overall mechanical assembly costs. Whereas we can say, no, we'll spend $20,000 to make this machine because at the end of the day, it's going to be generating a ton of value as a robot as a service business model.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's talking about the different energy consumptions and kind of rethinking, how robots do things, um, one of the things I want to circle back to, I'm kind of going backwards in what you said was, are you guys trying to get into like a weekly mowing model, like your traditional landscaper shows up once a week and mows a spot? Or are you trying to aim more towards like golf courses, since I know you came from a golf course background doing the GPS scooting, where golf courses can use it, and now you don't have to worry so much. It's like it takes a lot less energy to cut grass that's a little shorter than it does to wait a week and cut grass that's 3 inches long. So what is your vision, or what are you hoping, what would be your ideal scenario, I guess is what I'm asking. Like, I'm sure you're probably trying to design a machine that can wait a week, but ideally you'd team up with somebody that would be happy to let your machine mow 3 times a week because you don't have to put anybody on it. What's your thoughts on that, or are you guys talking about that internally?
Yeah, so we kind of look at it from the perspective of the landscaper has their workflow. We want to make sure that we're fitting into it and building a solution that is in perfect alignment with what their operations look like today, right? So anything beyond that, it starts to, you're fighting waves, right? It just turns into a thing where you're saying, well, this is the way to go, but you've got a lot of resistance along the way. And circling back to golf, yes, my first thought was when we were building this in the very, very beginning, thought that I had was, well, I know guys that are, like paying people 6 figures to mow grass and they're over at golf courses. So this is an easy target for us because the value prop is just so high. But what we found out was that golf is just a really, really tough industry to sell into. I mean, you start to get into the details and it looks like you're selling to a superintendent who then evangelizes you to a general manager. And then if that jump even happens, then the general manager says, okay, I'm completely sold. This is what we're going to do. He has to go and then convince the Greens Committee to talk about next year's budget, right? And it's like the Greens Committee is 20 people. That is a nightmare of a business, like a nightmare of a sales cycle to try and dive into. So we started to say, what's the total acreage? If we were to build a business model that is charging per acre of mow, right, which ultimately is a quantity of work value that is being completed, who's the best customer for us? A golf course might have 70 acres of rough or so, right? And then of course the greens and the tees and the fairways, they all have different mowers because it's like real mowers as opposed to rotary. You get more granular on the blade types and things start to spiral out where a robot, you'd have to have a bunch of different interchanging components to service all of that. Whereas a landscaping company, if they're, I don't know the exact numbers because it varies dramatically, but a landscaping company by and large, 40% of their maintenance work is mowing, 40 to 50% roughly, right? So if that company has 100 people employed going out and doing the field work, that means that 40 or 50 people, all they're doing every single day is cutting grass. So if we could go out and build a robot that then augments that work, and then the landscaping company can say, hey, we've got 100 people, but we can take on as many jobs as if we had 150 people. And then the landscaper says, there's no way I can find 50 people. But then we can come up and say, we don't need you to find 50 more people. We can give you a robot to then augment those additional 50 people so you can operate like a higher headcount company. All of a sudden, that's the utilization that the landscaping company needs to be able to grow their business. And that's ultimately what they're all trying to do in the first place, right?
Yeah, and it's exactly what I'm doing with Husqvarna. That's what I say all the time. I'm taking people that I always call it the grass ceiling, that are stuck at a certain wage because I can't really give them any more. So I'm giving them just enough pay increase every year to keep them around. It's limiting their growth in the company just to appease the customer and to grow our market share, or actually to keep our market share, really is what's happening. So you're absolutely right. If you can use the automation to grow that market share, take that person that's stuck and either rename them to a robotic um, uh, professional or a service technician, or move them into a hardscape section of the business. And now that they're doing the mulch and the tree trimming and the bush trimming and all the other stuff, it's a win. It's a win for the employee, it's a win for the customer, and it's a win for the business owner that is always scraping to get by, and just to keep the bills paid, so it definitely makes the industry more professional. So how do you go about going to market then? Are you guys currently just trying to sell units direct, or are you guys selling it in a service or subscription model? Like explain that a little. Like who are you? Who's your ideal person to partner to, and how do you sell through to that person?
Yeah, so for us, we're going direct to landscapers, right? So the objective for us is that we see an industry that is very technically starved and incredibly labor starved, right? So we're coming in and saying, okay, we're going to be able to provide a labor solution. But you get into the landscaping businesses and you start to understand, like you just mentioned, the value proposition for these guys is like, I'm going to take care of your property. You're going to pay me money. Taking care of somebody's property, the better, or like the higher quality they can do that, the more they can generate profit. And the guys that are doing the mow, blow, and go, they're hitting the baseline requirements because that's what you need to do. But then there are all these other additional upsell items that these guys are going, or they could potentially be going after, like, well, there's a brown patch in the grass, or there's a fungal infection on this palm tree over here, or there's some other problem that's like maybe a tree canopy covering up a stop sign and it's a liability for the property, right? All of these things could be getting attention, but they don't, because what you're really seeing is the labor constraint forces the landscaping companies to do the bare minimum, and then nothing else. And so the account manager has to go out and see these things and identify those upsell items and go and talk to the property owner and get it approved. And so we're going direct to the landscapers and saying, we're going to give you a scalable labor force, but with the potential to go into much higher value opportunities, like using software. Because really what you're doing is, a Husqvarna unit is a very basic like compute module, right? And it's because of the business model of Husqvarna. They say, well, we have $300 to make this thing. We need to sell it for $3,000. And that's the business model for Husqvarna and all the other robo mowers. And it's like driving that price down. Maybe you get into a 7x multiple instead of a 10, or maybe a 5x multiple off of the bill of materials cost. And it just, whittles that value down. But ultimately, that's why you're seeing the Husqvarnas being the best, is because they have done a good job of keeping that bar high and saying, this is the quality that we know is the bare minimum, and this is the price for that, right? And what I think we're really seeing with the Husqvarna units is autonomy is one of those, how should I put this? The winner in the space is going to be the product or the business, because I see these kind of like interchangeable because of the fact that it's a robot. It's not just a machine that'll go and do something. It's like you can have machines that are constantly learning from the data that's being circulated from the field to the servers, to the robot, to the field, to the servers, to the robot. And it's like a virtuous cycle, right? So the winner in the space is going to be the product or the company that builds the best autonomy solution, right? And when we look at that, we see any middleman between us and the landscaper as a distraction, right? It's like, it's been required because you've had this problem of brick and mortar businesses needing to be used for accessing the landscaper relationship. And if you ask any landscaper what the dealer makes their money on, it's not necessarily selling the things, it's on making the money for the parts and service of the things. So it's the maintenance schedule that's constantly put together. And I think that you mentioned this in a previous conversation, but you have a scenario where if somebody's mower breaks down, you have them send it back to you and you send over another one, right? And that's
Right,
done
yeah.
because the internet exists and Amazon has proven that this is a viable business model. The logistics pipes have gotten substantially better over the last decade, and that's enabled you to be able to do that, right? We're looking at the exact same thing, just with a 1,000-pound robot instead of a 50-pound robot. And the difference between those two from a technical perspective is dramatic, right? Like you might have one third of the compute of what a cell phone has in a Husqvarna mower. We're going to have, I don't know, maybe something on the orders of like 10 to 20 times the compute power of a cell phone in each robot that we put out. And what that really does is you've got all these sensors, you have this geometric understanding of the world, you have the heavy compute on the robot. You can surface a lot more valuable information than just, I'm going to randomly run around and cut grass in a field. Rather, you can say, you can automate the services like you need an irrigation upsell item here, or you should plant a tree here, or you need to take down this tree there, or the flower beds need to be taken better care of over here. And all of that information can be surfaced by the robot that we're putting into the field, as opposed to what you're seeing with today's robots.
So I don't normally do this on my show, but I just want to bring something up. So you said typically that anybody in between you and the landscaper is typically a distraction. And I agree with that. I think that I've told Husqvarna that's one of their biggest failures, and they know it. They tried to go to market with a traditional dealer model that made money on fixing carburetors and chainsaws and telling people they have the wrong gas mixture, so there's no warranty. I mean, that's they've been making money doing that, and that's all they want to do. Mm-hmm. And even though the Husqvarna unit has a small amount of computer power, we'll call it, you still can plug a laptop into them to see what's wrong, and most of those traditional dealers didn't have that. Yep. What I would like to challenge you and the people that are investing in you on knowing what automated outdoor solutions is you guys will be going direct to landscaper with your robot mower. Okay. But by teaming up with a company like mine, you would be going to the landscaper with robotic line stripers, unless you're making one of your own eventually, which that would be, I would understand why. But you're going with every tool, every automatic tool, and then giving locations for those things to come back. So I would just like you to rethink, like I said, and this could be for interesting listening because it's like a little Shark Tank episode. But what I would like is just to inspire you to think about the fact that most of the other traditional dealers have it wrong, and that is just they see automation as something they need to sell, but they really don't want to sell. Whereas the guy sitting on this side of this podcast right now is so geeked out about this stuff that anything automated is what we want to sell. So something to think about. I want to plant that seed in your mind. You might have to think about it for a couple of months, couple of years, but we're putting it in there. So now to get off that and go back to you guys. So what do you think percentage wise, because I know for me, like I always say, if I don't somehow being able to be 4% of this country's automation, I did something wrong because I'm a leader in automation right now, right? Do you guys have that same type of goal orientation to say, okay, there's Greensy, there's Gravely. I don't think, unfortunately for them, and no offense to if anybody from Greensy or Gravely is listening, but you're kind of late to the game, because why make something electric that somebody has to sit on when people like yourselves are making something electric that nobody has to sit on? You're going to have a quick splash and it's going to go away. What do you think? What's your thoughts on market share and how much you guys can gobble up once you get rolling?
Obviously we're a venture-backed company, so we're hyper ambitious in terms of like market share and what we're trying to go after. But I think ultimately it comes back to a couple things. Making sure that we're building a product that is accessible for the end user that we're targeting, right? So I think to the landscapers that we've brought on the team from other companies, right? Guys that are in Florida and Texas and running around with robots right now, they've been spending a lot of time on mowers, running around getting the grass cut. And there are 40 million acres of this stuff, irrigated turf grass, right? Not non-irrigated, but just irrigated 40 million. And that's in the continental US alone, right? $250 billion a year is spent on landscaping globally, and over 100 billion of that is spent in the US every year. So the US is by far and away the largest market for this service. It's one thing that we're seeing grow at around 8 or 9% year over year annually for the whole world. And as you get to more, I guess, like, what's the term I'm looking for? More developed states for the rest of the world, you start to see landscaping playing bigger and bigger roles. And I think people are starting to look at the outdoors and go, I feel a lot better when I'm sitting under a tree as opposed to sitting in an office under incandescent light bulbs, right? And these things all kind of factor in, but the answer to your question is far more ambiguous. I think that what we look at is we want to make sure that we're building something that fits into the fleet of every big landscaping company, and not just big, like anybody that's doing over $1 million a year in revenue is someone that we want to talk to, right? But for us, it's a matter of unit economics, not just selling a machine. We don't want to just sell a machine to somebody and say, all right, well, it's your problem now. Our objective is that we are literally scalable labor partners for our customers. So what you see today under the idea of like, well, you buy a mower and then you take care of the oil change, or you come back to me and I get money every week or every month for getting that stuff done. We're looking at it and saying, we want to give a company, let's say 10 mowers that they order. We send them 11 so they have an extra unit in their inventory in case one breaks down. And we can use the electrical components that are in the machine to be able to say, we're pretty confident that that transaxle is about to go bad, or we're pretty confident that you're running a flat tire on this machine, or we're pretty confident that one of your sensors is covered up, and we can surface that information to the landscaping company so they can rectify it on their own. And as they're rectifying it on their own, we can have another machine on the way to them, right? So it's a very, very integrated relationship that we see happening. And as a result, I think that we're kind of looking at it and going, what does the landscaper need? And the lowest hanging fruit from autonomy and the highest value for the landscaper use case is mowing grass. But the autonomy stack can apply to all kinds of other tasks: grass seed and fertilizer spraying, edging, blowing, or like clipping, pickup. Like all of these things kind of become bigger and bigger and bigger, but it's a holistic view of build the autonomy that's really, really good and build it from the ground up so that we know that it's rock solid. And then we just continue to add value, and then hopefully there are more opportunities for us to do so.
Well, yeah, and especially going off what you said about how you're reporting back to that server, and it's like it's so circular. You do the thing that's getting done the most, which is like mowing grass, and then you figure out, I'm sure you're already thinking how to strap a liquid spraying tank, and then say, okay, well, now this thing is wider because of the boom, or it's the same width because it's automatic and it doesn't make a difference on it fast, right? So, and that's the stuff that's so exciting for a guy like myself and other people that are getting involved in automation now, is the light bulb moments really start to click where you're like, okay, this is just the beginning. Today we're mowing grass, or we're thinking about mowing grass automatically. But 5-10 years from now, what are all the other things we can do? I say it every episode that I can, like snow removal is a $25 billion industry. A lot of it's in the United States. Well, I mean, Russia and stuff sounds like crazy too, but the point is, high liability cities, somebody's just got to be out there doing something all the time. So I just get excited because I live a platform like yours, and it's like, okay, you have 1,000-pound unit. How hard is it going to be to put some sort of snow blade on the front of it and push snow on sidewalks?
Yeah. I think that what's interesting is that you've got a scenario where there's a very low level complexity task, which is mowing, right? And we've seen Roombas around. We all have one in our house, or a lot of people do. And they're just running around doing the basic thing of sweep and collect dirt off of the floor, right? Very, very rudimentary autonomy. But landscaping is one of these things where there are maybe a couple of those things like grass seed, fertilizer dropping down, or doing mowing and stuff. You get into edging and it's like, okay, this needs to be precise. It needs to be right up against the concrete, and it needs to be heavily monitored. And then you get into things that are like what you guys do with hardscapes, or you do tree pruning, or you do bush trimming, or planting flowers, or planting trees, or moving a big tree into another property. These things are not easily automated. Like Boston Dynamics is one of these companies that's doing amazing stuff and has amazing autonomy, but even they are limited by the material science components, limited by the actuators that they have access to. Limited by the sensors and the compute and the battery packs. All of these things kind of come in, and it's you see Spot, and Spot's amazing. I would love to have a Spot run around and pick up trash all over the place, but the reality is the battery pack of 15 to 25 minutes just is not enough, right? And so you can see the big picture vision of the long term that I think for me at least, and I think I speak for a lot of the team at Scythe, we see a future where the objective that we're going after is to scale human labor in service of the environment, right? So there's a massive umbrella and opportunity for everybody getting into this like idea of automation for outdoor spaces and being able to take care of the outdoors in a more scalable manner. But the mowing is the tip of the iceberg, and the science and the technology that continues to build on top of this area of focus only gets deeper and deeper, and eventually you end up in a scenario where, hypothetically, a little bit of science fiction time, it's like you could theoretically have a truck. And right now we're going from a truck with 5 men. Maybe we can go and convert that to a truck with 3 men or 2 men, right? Just by having the mowers in there and the robot mowers do the mowing, and then the other higher value tasks are done by the humans. But it's not unreasonable to expect that in 20 years, you can go from 5 men to 1 man, right? And you say, this one guy will be there only to interact with the customer and make sure that the human to human interaction is there, and that the customer is happy, and that the work's being done the way that the customer wants. And then it's just that one person's job to make sure that the robots are actually doing all of the work that they're supposed to in the way that they're supposed to. And their questions are not, what time and day do I need to be here, but rather, do you want your bushes to look like an elephant or a donkey this week? Like the potential for these things is pretty dramatic.
No, well, and it's important to say, because I'm sure you guys hear it all the time too, is what robotics are going to do for our industry is actually just make more enjoyable careers and not take away jobs. At the end of the day, if you could have a career, I mean, let's think about this. If you could have a career that was just checking on the robots, writing reports to confirm the robot is doing what it's supposed to do, and interacting with the customer that's very happy about the robotic service you're providing, that's a nice career. Right now, we have our jobs where people have to make decisions of, do I keep mowing in the rain? Is there lightning? So do I go duck out in the trailer? If I don't mow today in the rain, I'm going to run out of days to mow, and the customer is going to yell at me. This is what the current state of affairs is, as we know it. And so I think I'm just amazed every time I talk to people like yourself. Every time I talk to somebody, and I think I can't talk to somebody more intelligent, I talk to a guy like you. And then I'm like, okay, well, there we go. We just kicked it up a notch, So how many mowers do you guys have out? And what areas are you guys? I heard you say Texas, California, right? So it sounds like maybe you got some in some Sunbelt states. But how many are out? How many are you collecting data from, roughly? You don't have to give me, just roughly.
Sure. So right now, like I mentioned before, we've gone after 4 different prototypes, and we have operations in Vero Beach, Florida, and Austin, Texas, and then our headquarters is in Longmont, Colorado, outside of Boulder. And so every time we have a new generation of machine that we put out into the world, the focus starts to become solve the problems for this new prototype, and the old prototypes can just live as long as they live, and no more software support for those units. And the software, of course, like carries over from iteration to iteration, but largely when you have a new board pop in, or you have some other components, or even just the dynamics of the machine and the details of it start to change, then you're still dealing with legacy problems on the previous gen. So we're fairly fast to kill off the old gen units. Having said that, right now there's one robot in each of those areas that I just mentioned of the current generation. And we're probably only going to make around 10 of these units before we make the next gen. And the next, I should say the first unit of this next gen is probably going to be put together in another 4 months, I'd say, maybe mechanically, and then software brought up over the next 6 or 7 months. So maybe we'll have one of the new generation units put together and ready for GIE this year. But it's just a constant work in progress, and there are always problems that pop up and things you wouldn't have expected. And then that's the difference between going from a prototype to a product, right? And we're very rapidly approaching the product stage of what we're doing. But I'm not going to try and fool anybody on this or any other conversation. I think it's important to understand that these are complex machines, and it's hyper important for us to make sure that we're building something that's safe before we go and just ship a bunch of units out that could do some damage to people. People are already getting struck by lightning and, you know, rolled over into the lake and then pinned underneath the thing because they forgot their like roll bar and stuff. We don't need to add to that with like autonomous machines that are going out and doing property damage, or even worse, personnel damage. So we take safety hyper seriously at Scythe. We want to make sure that we get it right before we step on the gas and really build these things in very large quantities.
You have an idea of what the cost per acre? So, because it sounds to me like you guys are kind of going after a, you know, like you already said, maybe a cost per acre, you know, to mow. Do you guys have an idea of where you're going to be, or do you think it's too early to say right now since you're still in the prototype phase?
So I can tell you where we're at currently. Right now, well, to answer the question a little more directly, when you have an autonomous system and you can like we intentionally built these machines to be very similar in form factor. So we can control the robots with a cell phone. We can control the robots through a remote connection. We can control the robots through autonomy, and we can control the robots through hand controls, right? And the hand control modality is the same as any other mower, where you just hop on and go, right? And it's a big objective for us to make sure that that is not lost, but rather even simplified from what we see in most machines today. Just bring some electrical complexity and user experience simplicity. And then you've got a machine that is very accessible, yet has the same higher power functionality that we're going after in the autonomy side. So it's kind of like, yes, the Tesla still has the steering wheel, right? When you factor that into pricing and you're looking at it on a per work output basis, you realize, well, what happens in a per work unit basis with somebody actually driving the thing, because the complexity is too high for autonomy, or because the robot gets stuck, or, you know, who knows what happens, right? So as a result, we have two different pricing modes. One is manual use, which we currently peg at $7 per acre. And ultimately that's just set up to try and match or beat a little bit the cost of having regular equipment, right? So the gas powered systems, we did a pretty deep analysis into the numbers and figured out, okay, well, based on the number of hours that somebody gets out of a typical machine, commercial machine today, they're paying around $7 an acre for the use. It's actually closer to $9, but we figured we'll cut that a little bit, and that's where we ended up with the $7. And then as far as the autonomous use, right now we're charging $25 an acre for the companies that we're working with. But what we, you know, and this is very preliminary. We haven't done the extreme diligence that we need to verify this, but going into the pricing model and trying to understand what the market really looks like, it was pretty clear to us, and this goes back to the very beginning of this conversation, it's very clear to us that you kind of have this like massive bell curve spectrum in the industry where you have one side of the bell curve, which is incredibly low complexity mowing, like for example, a sod farm. There are no dynamic obstacles, there are no static obstacles, dynamic being something like a dog or a deer or a tree, static being a tree or a sign or something like that. And you can use a 60-foot tractor pull to just go and take care of the entire sod farm, right? Like that's the lowest level complexity, and there's no slope, right? So it's just go and mow, done. And then there's the exact opposite end of the spectrum, which is extremely high complexity. And this might be something like on the top of a Manhattan skyscraper, somebody's got 60 square feet and it's got 3 trees in there and there are always people around. And that's something that somebody would say, well, just to get over to your place, I'm going to have to wheel my mower into the elevator, get a bunch of dirty looks along the way because it's gas powered, get onto your property and then mow it for 20 minutes. And I've got another 2-hour drive to get out of the city after I get it done. So I'm going to charge you an arm and a leg to do that every time I do, right? And then in between those two, you've got this massive, the normal market, right? Which is like residential, and residential is going to be more towards the complexity side. The more commercial you get, the more you're towards the lower complexity side. And the value between the two is pretty stark, right? So a sod farm, somebody might say it costs me $6 an acre to mow the sod farm. And somebody would say, well, it costs me $600 an acre to mow the Manhattan skyscraper yard, right? And we see the dynamic pricing high probability. And at least in my opinion, I think the objective for us is not to make mowing free. The objective is to figure out a way to augment the labor force that currently does this work to be able to get to where those landscapers don't have to do it manually, but rather they can rely on an autonomous solution. And the more profit margin we have in our mix, the better the autonomy gets, the faster it gets, the more efficient we become as a company. And ultimately it comes down to the more money we make, the more money we can put into R&D, which feeds back into that ultimate philosophy of the best autonomy will be the solution that wins out in the market. And so we need to make sure that we're doing exactly that. And the bigger the budget is, the better off we'll be.
I love what you just said, because on several of the shows I've already said to landscapers that are just sitting on the edge, like if you listen to this show and you're excited about automation, you've got to be willing to spend some money on automation, because the more that we adopt it, our industry adopts it, the better the stuff's going to get. But if the people like yourselves can't pay off all the venture debt, like the R&D work, right? The work that's in on the front end, just to even bring it to market, it's never going to get any better, and so it's just important for me to just reiterate the fact that, if you're interested in automation, get involved with some form of it, because now is the time, right? I mean, it's time to take action and do it. I have to tell you from a different perspective, like, sometimes I go to shows and people know me as like the robot guy from AOS. There's other times I go as Langton Group, and I'll hear all these landscapers complaining about labor's going up and minimum wage is up and this industry is screwed. And all I hear is a bunch of bitching and whining. And I'll say, you should buy some robots. And like, fuck that. And it's like, okay, see, you should just get out there. Like, go and sell the company, let somebody gobble you up, because you're not willing to make any changes for the good, And anyways, so I just wanted to hit on that.
I mean, there are a lot of companies that are doing exactly that, right? Like if you talk to Pam in Atlanta, I can't remember the name.
Dooley?
What's that?
Is like Pam Dooley? Or
yeah, Pam. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember her company's name over in Atlanta, but they're experimenting with the Husqvarna units, and Mariani and his crew are over in Chicago doing the same thing. And
I supply Mariani, right?
Oh, really? That's too funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a partner with them. I'm not partner. I mean, I'm their I am their robotic supplier.
Yeah, okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we saw a couple of those guys over in Chicago a year or so ago with the Bighorn units, and just showed them, and we're like, we're still in development. And it's one of those things where the Husqvarna units, I mean, obviously they have a solid market opportunity, right? And you see, if I'm not butchering the name, is it Green Man, or Greenman? I think maybe it's Weed Man. Is that right?
Yeah. So Weedman's Jennifer Lemke's company.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're working on another project of their own, building their own robot mowers. And you saw Robin, Autopilot, and a bunch of these other companies doing similar things. And it's certainly one of these things where you can say, well, if we install Husqvarna units, then we can take one guy out instead of two, because all it is just doing the edging or doing the tree trimming, or maybe instead of it being a weekly thing, it's a monthly thing. And then it's really up to us, or I should say, it's up to us as equipment manufacturers and people trying to figure out what the future looks like, to make sure that the business model is attractive for companies that we're trying to service. Just like it's important for Mariani and other people in the space playing with these things, trying to figure out the business model, for them to make sure that it's an attractive proposition for their customer, the homeowner in some cases, or commercial property owners, et cetera. So I'd be foolish not to say that, we see ourselves saving around 50% of the total cost for the labor to mow an acre with even this current pricing schema, right? But it's also, ignorant to say that that's the case in all properties at $25 an acre, right? It's one of these things where it needs to flex, and that's something that, there will need to be systems built, at least I expect, because otherwise what you do is, and this goes back to the pricing model and the overall innovation structure. It's like, how could I expect to build a ubiquitous solution when there's a, one price fits all, market focus, right? When it's like, in reality, there's not one price fits all. It's very much like in flux, and that's when you start to see the segmentation between a Husqvarna unit, or maybe somebody gets away with a Works machine, which is like what, a third the price, or maybe an Echo machine that's maybe 5 times or 3 times as expensive as a Husqvarna unit, but it covers more acreage. And it's certainly up in the air, and I think that we're all doing the best we can to figure out what that looks like. But at the end of the day, if there's an industry looking at technology, wishing that they had some, and then they're complaining about there being margins in technology, it's not setting technology up for success in that market, right?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple things you said there too I want to undress and get into. Is that and I told you our podcast, we could probably have 3 episodes. I think maybe I might have to have you back on, so in the sake of time. But so the first thing I always wonder is, then I'm going to ask you this: how many years has it taken you to get to the point you're at Scythe right now? To get to the point of your robot right now, how many years in are you?
3.5 years.
Okay. So you said something that was interesting when you were talking, and I just want to clear it up. Like, you brought up, like, some of these industry leaders like trying to make their own robots now or figure out their own thing. Okay. And I'd be surprised, like, for instance, I'd be surprised if Robin was trying to do that, since I know they're capitally incentivized by Husqvarna. Like, honestly, if Husqvarna was listening to this right now, they should want to punt them, and I'm just going to call it out right on the air. I always get upset because I know I'm the largest AAP dealer in Husqvarna's like fleet, or Husqvarna's like portfolio. I don't see one thing about us ever on LinkedIn, but they talk about Robin constantly. What I don't understand is why people even want to try to waste the time anymore to try to make their own robot when there's people like you already doing it. And I'm just saying it, like, I'm saying it for the professionals listening. I think they're wasting, this is my opinion, it's only an opinion. I think they're wasting time, and I think you're going to like this opinion, by the way. I think they're wasting time trying to do something on their own. It's almost like in my opinion, it's almost greedy at this point, because they should just be partnering with the person that's already got 3.5 years in and rolling with it, you know? That's just, I guess it's a message I just want to make very clear to people that listen. It's like, we all buy Ford trucks, Chevy trucks. Some of us buy Dodges, even though personally, I don't know why, but why anybody, whatever, that's a personal opinion again. But we all have trucks we buy. I don't see any landscaper trying to invent their own truck right now to pull their shit around. They just go and they buy one and they put it in their labor model and they go. But now that we've gotten into automation, everybody is on this quest to be like, well, I'm going to make my own robot. You're wasting time, people. Find somebody that's got something that works, buy it from them, partner with them, let them be your robotic specialist, and just keep doing what you're doing. Sorry, I'm just very passionate about this. I just need to vent that out, because it's frustrating to me, because I know all of these people that you're talking about, and I talk to all of these people, and apparently they're not listening to some of the things that I'm saying. So it makes me happy, because while they're all sitting there screwing around trying to make robots, I'm just going to use the robots that are there. And one day they're going to realize I'm mowing all the acres robotically while they're still trying to invent their own. But anyway, sorry. Yeah. That sounds very, I don't normally sound arrogant on my podcast, but
yeah, I think to hit on that a little bit, it's interesting that it's happening, but it's also not super unexpected, right? Like, very rarely does the first mover or like first to market end up being the best to market, right? And what we've seen for a long time across multiple companies and multiple even centuries at this point is that you have industries that are completely dominated by one player, and then they go and they bury the lead, right? Like the perfect example of this is Kodak, right? Like Kodak invented the CCD, but then buried it to protect their film business. And so I think what's kind of fascinating is that innovation is innovation. People are always trying to like figure out a better way. And I think that's what makes entrepreneurship, innovation, and being human just great. It's kind of like, I've got a better way to do something. That's fantastic. Let's go and see it. And I'm, like constantly applauding that effort. I think it's human nature, right? So there's no fighting it. It's just one of those things where some companies might go and say, well, I'm going to completely adopt Aspire because they've built the best solution for me. And then other companies are going to go and try to recreate Aspire because it's something that they want for them. And whether or not they turn that into a product that can go and generate money for them or not is another question. So we'll see. I think that the more people that are digging in on it, the more innovation there will be, and I think that's a good thing.
I mean, you
might not be good for the individual, to be clear. It might be a complete waste of time for the individual, but from the ecosystem perspective, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, listen, I mean, all I'm trying to say is I think people should just kind of stay in their lanes, right? Okay, so like that's like what it comes down to. So, I know that if I were to say it to have said that 3.5 years ago, I would feel foolish 3.5 years later, knowing what you guys have accomplished. So, I totally get that. I guess it's just what I don't understand. I guess I'm very much an industry advocate, and that industry that I'm passionate about is the landscaping industry. Okay. I have been, the fact that I got into robotics 5 years ago is what's getting me in front of a guy like you right now. Okay. But there's a lot of people that I'm talking to on a given day that they should just focus on their green business and becoming more successful with that business, and less focused on trying to invent something new, because it's a distraction. So yes, I'm not 100%. I'm not trying to down anybody to innovate, because I think I'm an innovative person. All I'm trying to do is like say, I'd rather see someone use your robot and put it out there so you can keep getting more and more information and make it better, than to have another competitor of your product. Because all that happens is it slows everything, all the market penetration down, because now there's a million different things to choose from when we really maybe only need 5 or 10 horses in the race. And then a lot of landscapers that are complaining about profitability can become very profitable by just picking their partnership. That's it. That's what I'm trying to say, you know. But I guess it's good that I can be clear on that so people don't tune out of my podcast now. But all right, so we talked a lot about robotics. Every person I've ever had on my show, I like to talk about kind of background, learn a little about the family. So give me some. Tell me a little bit about yourself at a young age, not at a working age. So, what sports do you like? Do you have brothers and sisters? Stuff like that.
So yeah, I have one sister, 2 years younger than myself. I pre work is an interesting stipulation. I don't know if I mean, almost like I always had some kind of work to do. I mean, I was raised by my mother, right? My dad and mom split when I was 2 years old, so it was always a single mom, and I grew up just kind of taking care of my sister, and eventually, of course, she didn't need me to take care of her, and she was big enough, and of course, then I'd make jokes about how she was always living in my shadow because she would know my friends, and they would know her as Isaac's sister, not as Chelsea. And so being kids doing kid things and having kid attitudes about it all. But I think I was probably working and doing things for money probably since I was maybe 12 years old, right? So the pre-work stipulation notwithstanding, I think that I was doing baseball at a young age, really liked playing baseball. I started playing soccer, loved soccer. I rode crew in high school. And I think if there was any sport, so to speak, that I, like stuck with the longest and went most competitive, it was crew. I rode in Sarasota, and so Sarasota, Florida has a really good sculling or like rowing program, and a couple of the guys that were on my crew ended up in the Olympics. So really impressive guys, and and then getting in the military was kind of just same continuation of like the adrenaline junkie party time, like going in and doing stupid stuff and seeing who could out stupid the other person. I was never the one that was like completely able to just shut off the frontal lobe and do something incredibly stupid. So I always usually lost those contests, but it was always a good time. So yeah.
Where were you stationed when you were in the Navy?
So I did my boot camp in Chicago or Great Lakes. Okay. And then did my A school, which was interior communications mate in the same area, and then went to Buds and got hurt at Buds in San Diego, and then ended up over in Puerto Rico doing shore duty, healing up so that I could then go back. And then me being true to form, got in trouble, and instead of going back to Buds, I ended up getting out and going into college. But I think that one of the few things I've kind of been one of these people that's like, I don't really believe in regrets, but not going back to Buds and focusing on that, I think was a pretty big blow for me personally. I wish that I had done it, but a couple friends of mine went back and got their tridents, and they're incredible guys, and I think that it speaks well to the comeback story when you've got somebody that like gets hurt or fails some part of training or something and goes back and succeeds. And I think that's a common thread in the special warfare community. It's just the dedication and determination. It's a very enviable trait. And I'd like to think that it's an area of my personality that I've tried to put into business.
Yeah. What'd you do to hurt yourself, or what'd you hurt?
Bilateral tibular stress fractures. I thought I would go to the Navy and try to be a SEAL because I hated running. And I thought, well, I love swimming, hate running. seals don't run, they swim. And boy, was I wrong. So going into buds and getting hurt, it was just a wide awakening of no, you're going to run and you're going to run a lot. And my body just wasn't able to handle it. Some of my buddies just say it's weak genetics, and I have a hard time disagreeing with them.
Really? Well, it sounds like you're making up for it with brain power, because you got some amazing vision and imagination, really, if you're doing all this stuff with the businesses. So, are there things in your other businesses that, obviously you've got multiple businesses, so you've got to have some good success stories in those and some failure stories, or maybe not true failure, but like, good thing I caught myself before it was a failure. Any interesting stories in those other business models you want to share that you think would be good for the listeners? Or
I think so. As a guy in a venture-backed company that grew up in the Southeast, it's a very long haul, in my opinion, between those two, right? I mean, Vance wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy that kind of dives into this topic, but it's one of these things where it's very easy to discount the value of where you start off, right? When I grew up, my my understanding of the world was just go to school and put your head down and work hard and you'll get ahead. And there was a pretty strong dismissiveness around building a business and doing something with science and technology and changing the world, right? And I mean, for me, I'm a millennial, pre-internet millennial, so to speak, where it's like, okay, I remember the yellow pages. I remember what it was like to not have the internet, to not have access to information. And that was my adolescence. Growing up, it was just, okay, there's AOL, but what is AOL really at that time? It was basically just a, troll stream of permanent existence, right? And now you have things like YouTube, you have podcasts, you have people that are experts in fields that are getting out and actually making themselves available to other people, because the leverage of technology and software and just overall innovation, broadly speaking, it's made it to where you can find your path a lot easier. And so I wish that I had that kind of experience growing up as a teenager and being entrepreneurial and kind of having the motivation and drive to go out and make a big impact and to use Jobs's phrase of make a dent in the universe. I think that it's really important to kind of understand what you're going after and what the big picture is, not just what it is today. And I've had the fortune and misfortune of building various companies in various industries. I've gotten into businesses because naturally, as an entrepreneur, I am opportunistic, I guess, maybe opportunistic to a fault, where it's like one of my bad habits, which I am actively working to constantly correct and grow on, is not just acting before thinking, but rather analyze and then act, and act in a more precise manner, as opposed to just mad dash scramble in the general direction of over here. And so getting into industries where I thought there was a great opportunity, but then in reality, I'm kind of just surrounded by people that I think are not high caliber individuals from a personality or ethical perspective. Just because I'm like, I know there's money here, so let me get into this and I'll deal with the people problem later, which is kind of what drove me to getting into more advanced technology and saying, let's get into something that's more intellectually stimulating. So I think, and the nail in the coffin here is, with Scythe, the original thought was, yeah, mowing sucks. Let's go make a robot to do that. But after a year and a half or so, it became pretty clear to me. I'm like, well, this is going to be a long haul. What's the reason to do this? Like, what's the purpose? What's the intent? What's the core belief that needs to be there for me to stick it out as an entrepreneur? Because as you know, when you're building a business, it is not a short-term, get rich quick scheme. It's like, no, it's real hard work, and the money might even never come, right? So you have to find some kind of core belief in yourself to say, no, this is important and it's worth suffering through and putting the nose to the grindstone for the better part of a decade to see it come through. And even fully acknowledging that it might not ever come through. It might be a complete failure. And I think for me, Scythe was one of these things where it was like, okay, I know there's something interesting here. I know there's some value here. And there's like this massive market opportunity, it turns out. But what really drives me now and going through what we're experiencing today, just building the business and constantly progressing over this like slog of just building what is currently non-existent. It's like the value of going out and scaling human labor in service of the environment. It's like, build robots to pick up trash, build robots to plant trees, build robots to take better care of turf, build robots to go out and remove plastic from the oceans. Like, these things excite me, right? These things motivate me, these things drive me. And I think that's what's helped me to, be more even keeled and take them on the chin when they need to happen, and to push forward when the opportunity presents itself, and to like go through those hard knocks as they pop up, right? I think that that's something I would say to any entrepreneur is make sure that you're focusing on something that you actually believe in, because on the hard days, you're going to need something inspirational to get you through them for sure.
That is great advice. And you, first of all, so everybody knows this is the first time him and I have talked. And honestly, it's like we're the same people with different faces, because this is like my day to day. I think you're ahead of me in how many businesses you actually have. But you said some things that resonate so deeply to me is, people see an entrepreneur and instantly think you're just raking in the cash. You've got to be an entrepreneur to realize that you start a business and it's like your baby, and you just keep taking care of it, and you're feeding it, and you're changing its clothes, you're changing how it looks with marketing, and you're watching it grow in front of you without ever really knowing how it's going to turn out sometimes, because you've got to constantly evolve year by year. And I know for me that, like, I start these businesses with the realization that I'm not going to pull a salary out of them right away. Because if I really want to grow them and nurture them, I have to put every bit I can into them to get them to be a world-class organization. I look at like my landscape company, we're up to, we do about $7 million now. And when you think about it, we really incorporated in 2005. So I look at that and it feels like a snail's pace. I'm like, oh my gosh, we only do 7 million. But then I'll talk to people and I go, oh my God, you do 7 million, but people don't realize it took me 5 years. I was a union electrician while I was growing that business. I was working a day job and then getting off of work, putting on a Langton Group polo and walking into stores and selling work for my landscapers to do.
Yep.
There is a lot of sweat that goes into starting a business.
Yep.
But I've always thought, if I'm going to start it and I'm going to grow it, I'm going to treat it like one of my children, and I'm never going to abandon it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to put in the time. So that being said, every business I have, I love, but they all feed. The one thing that makes us different is I'm private owner of all the businesses, and they all kind of feed back to the other corporation. I've really figured out how to set, it's like, I don't want to buy from other people, so it's like, I buy a lot of LS tractors, so I started an LS tractor dealership. I'm starting a skid steer dealership now, because why should I buy from somebody else? I'm going to buy from me. So do you have favorites though? Because I know you've gotten some businesses sold. So are there ones that you sold that you kind of miss being involved? I'm just wondering, this is for my own wonder. Because sometimes I wonder if I were to ever sell one of my businesses, and if I were to be told, okay, here's the money, see you later, if I would actually miss it, So help me with that.
My short answer would be no. I think that for me, I've found myself in this situation where I'm just constantly like, I've been here too long, it's time to go, right? Or the
So I could probably ask you questions for days. I do know that we are running pretty high on time here. I think that it's actually a good spot to probably what you just said to kind of sign off, I think. I think that you are a great human being. I loved having you on the show today. I actually hope that I can see this thing work. Too bad when you were up to see Mariani, you didn't come to see me also,
Are you
because
in
I
Chicago?
would love to. I'm in Chicago. Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, so we're just outside of Chicago. We're out in Woodstock. Um, so we're just west of Mariani. So they're Lake County, I'm McHenry County. Um, but if you're ever up here again, we've got to make some time to get together and see each other. Or if I'm ever in your neck of the woods, I think I need to stop and see you. But I truly hope we stay in touch. I really appreciate you being on today. And yeah, that's it. I think this is a great ending point.